Hello, viewers, artists, and all alike to our lounge alley. This is Drawing Comics, Conan, part 38. I'm your host. And this is what you're going to be dealing with for the rest of the night. It is amazing work done by John Buscema. One of my favorite artists, among many, but he is actually a huge inspiration when it comes to comics. I love that he balances realism with comic book work. Like, if you look at this face expression, right, it's like right in between a realistic face, yet maintains a comic book vibe. Like, it has enough detail to make the eye see it in that light, see it in more of like a realistic face. But I think working with the colors as well, the limited amount of colors at the time, the fact that it's like flat coloring, also kind of gives it that comic book vibe, you know. So he really does combine both of those really well. Just even in here, you know, despite you not really being able to see a lot of detail in the face, his line work is so excellent that it still shows this very much like a sophisticated kind of anatomical approach to figures and face expressions, as you see on here as well. I really like how he tells the story, how there's certain action scenes there, and his camera angle use as well, as you could see in a lot of these panels. Like, he does them very well, and he nails it, you know. And that's just the beginning. Like, as you see throughout the panel, you know, turning over to this one, his you know, demonstration of the figure and the drama in the scene and the face expressions there as well. He's able to do that, panning out and giving you a good view and scope of what's going on. And the symbolism there, you know, of him being crucified on a tree in the middle of nowhere, you know, on a tree that's dead. Basically, he's on his way out as well, with these birds circling around, waiting for an opportunity to feast. You know, and then just using these panels to just kind of like evoke some sort of like intrigue, you know, like from this panel, him looking worried and trying to see like, hey, what's going on over there in the distance? Am I actually seeing something? And then gradually building it up to actually being a friend of his, you know. So I think it's just a really cool and clever way of telling the story. This is the cover for it. I made a short film about John Buscema. It's a short little flick, 5 minutes. You guys can find that in the video section. So if you head over to the video section, you click on the filter and filter it based on collections, you'll see a highlight folder. And in that highlight folder, I have all my special streams that I've been having throughout the Art Lounge Alley. And in that folder, you guys can find this 5-minute flick talking about John Buscema, where I give you guys an insight into his life, starting from a young age to his eventual spot at Marvel, and just showing you guys all different type of work that he's done. Huge body of work, some beautiful rare drawings that I dug up. You guys can check that out in the collections folder there. So I'm going to continue on today, working on the next panel here. I'm going to be inking something that I haven't done for a while. I'm looking to ink all these drawings that I've done, studies that I've done, so that I could color them as well. And I just use that as an opportunity. You know, this is something I was talking about with another streamer in a previous stream, about how great it is to study from these panels. It gives you opportunities to practice all these things, like, you know, understanding camera angles, how to tell a story, you know, how to narrate from panel to panel, using all different shots, whether it's panned out or zoomed in or bird's eye view, you know, that sort of thing. Getting an opportunity to learn how to ink. You don't have to worry about, you know, what do I do? Where, when you're sitting in front of your sketchbook and you're staring at a blank canvas, you're like, you know, how do I practice ink? You know, what do I create first to get there? This is a perfect opportunity to do that. You don't have to worry about that. You just get an opportunity to practice your technique, to practice all these things, like whether it's coloring, right? Like I'm using India inks to color, whether it's inking, whether it's drawing or figuring out or understanding perspective and, you know, angles and emotion and all that stuff. It's there for you. You know, you get to every day have something to work for, having something to practice from, without having to worry about like, well, what next? You know, what do I do next? And I think that's a really big challenge, especially if you're a beginner, if you're learning and you're just like, well, first, before I get a chance to practice inking, I got to figure out what I want to draw, you know, or what am I going to complete in order to get that opportunity. So picking a favorite comic book or any piece of work and just having that be your daily schedule is going to improve your work dramatically. You know, you're really going to see a huge difference. So that's kind of why I'm doing all this stuff. It's giving me something to work from. You know, aside from, it's nice to just take a break from projects and do something new, to do something different. You know, even though they're very time consuming, which is why I had to cut my daily stream for comics, drawing comics, coloring comics. It's still nice to take a break from something and do something else. Keep the spontaneity. Did I say it right? Spontaneity? Going, you know, just keep things fresh. And I think there's always something to learn. You know, there's, I think regardless of what skill you are, in the moment you abandon the idea that you always have something new to learn, I feel like is when you stop growing as an artist and you just draw the same stuff over and over and over again. In fact, that's something that I find kind of frustrating, and you know, about a lot of these like artistic positions in some ways is that some artists get stuck doing the same stuff over and over and over again. And I think a lot of that has to do with, of course, money. You know, if you don't need to if you don't need to worry about that, if you don't need to think about that, I think the door is open for you to keep trying all different type of stuff. You know, like I remember when I used to work at a school, it was an art school, I would see some like gallery exhibits, and it would be an artist and they're drawing just trees, trees blowing in the wind. And the entire gallery exhibit was of that. Now, it was well done. It wasn't bad. I still liked it. I still liked the technique. I still liked what was on display, but it's just got that thought in my head that, like, this guy's doing it because he's trying to make himself a reputation or a name by having this theme going on. And sometimes I find that to be very restricting. Like, what if one day you want to do something else? You still need to consider rent and all this other stuff that you need. And that would mean you're taking a risk of having to, like, venture into something that is totally new, and you don't know how it's going to be received. So you have to kind of, like, make room for that, to produce that work, to be experimental and play around with it. Yeah, as opposed to just, if you feel like doing something different because that really resonates with you right now, like that is something that you want to express, some sort of experience that you're having, I think it becomes more and more difficult for people to stray away from things. It's kind of like, I want to say what happens with actors too. There's some actors that, for instance, do comedy, and, they're only seen as this guy who did this role. And then when they try to venture into something else, to really experience or to, like, take on something new, because it is an art form. It is something that absolutely is an art form, and I think as an artist they want to experience something new, to challenge themselves or to express themselves in, like, a different way. But because they've been doing comedy for such a long time, it's this, like, attachment that is now made whenever people think of them. Like, oh, they're trying to do a serious role, but they were in, like, what is it called? What's that movie that had, like, multiple series to it? The Hangover or something, like, oh, they were in that. So people taking them seriously becomes, like, a whole other thing, a whole challenge as well. It's just getting kind of stuck with roles, or getting stuck with this perception. And I think that stifles creativity. That really stifles, like, new and interesting innovation and creativity from an artist. Though I think it's probably more challenging for visual artists to venture into something new than it is for, I think, actors. Because actors make a fuck ton of money. Like, ridiculous amount of money from advertisements, royalty, like, all that stuff. So they definitely have the time and the freedom. Like, if they wanted to quit, working big pictures or, like, working big productions and pursue, like, a different field, they're they're an actor that's been doing comedy and they don't want to do it anymore and they just want to make more serious films, they could go and do that. They could do underground films and focus on movies that aren't what is typically perceived in the limelight. Yeah, they have that freedom. Oh, bummer. I got a little carried away with this conversation. I missed an opportunity to be very careful with these lines. I mean, that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm practicing this stuff, because they were doing these this type of inking at such ease. Like, if you guys check out John Buscema's videos, there's like an Instagram account dedicated to John Buscema's work. They recently started posting like videos of him drawing and inking. And the way he was doing it was at such speed, you know, like really fine lines. No problem getting tiny little details. And I was amazed to see it. I really didn't think that there were many videos in general. So whoever's making those Instagram posts probably has some ties to John Buscema's archive. Because prior to making the short film that I mentioned, and that you guys can check out in the highlights section, I was digging for stuff like that. I was digging to see if, like, hey, are there any examples or any, like, videos that demonstrate his work and demonstrate his process. And the only one that came up was Marvel's How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, where you just get to see, like, little snippets of him doing some drawings here and there, but nothing like you would see on that Instagram account. And I am hoping, you know, on that topic of Instagram, I am hoping that new social media comes out, because I'm just not into Meta for a lot of reasons. I mean, for those of you guys who've been following the stream, I get into topics about how toxic capitalism is and how disgusting that political system is, and what kind of behaviors it encourages from people for the sake of making more money, and how a lot of these corporations are in favor of, like, fascist politics, you know, in favor of corporations dictating our lives and dictating our sense of freedom, because you know, the more they control, the easier they can determine, like, what the outcome is going to be, you know, for their benefit, for their sake of profit. If you are dependent on them, then they're going to make more money. So they don't want competition, and they're going to rule things out. And if they favor, let's say, things like fascism, if they favor things that are, incredibly erosive to progress and independence and freedoms and all that stuff, because it gives them more profits. Then where do people go? You know, if the option is only this social media platform. And I think people aren't taking that seriously enough with all these buyouts that are happening by people who don't favor, let's say, diversity, people who don't favor personal choice and freedoms. Then it's going to be just another platform where they collect information about you, where they're able to figure out exactly everything that you do on there. And yeah, that's an attack on our privacy, on our freedom to choose, let's say. And since there are no choices, then we're gonna be, let's say, against certain things that are going on, but they're gonna still continue to bank off of our traction because there are no other options. So they're gonna make more money, and they're gonna pour that money into policies that disfavor our freedoms as people, you know, and our choices as people, as individuals. And where, you know, people are, this is what's going on now, basically. People are complaining, and they're just like, oh, how could they do that? And so on and so forth, while giving the same company traction that's favoring all those policies that's, you know, contributing to the campaigns of people who promise to make sure those policies, those scenarios stay in place rather than change towards like what the majority is saying. Hey, this is destructive. This is not right. You know, you're making life even more unpleasant and difficult, and you're creating really toxic environments and supporting really toxic environments. And the more there is of it, the more people are going to interact and think like that, right? Because a lot of people are thinking like, well, how do I make it? How do I don't want to struggle. I don't want to, you know, have tough times. So I guess I have to be like this in order to not be in those kind of scenarios. And next thing you know, more and more people are backing, let's say, fascist behavior. And we all know where that led in history. That didn't lead to a nice place. And it created more and more sociopathic, psychopathic behavior. So just talking about all this stuff, you know, how that ripples through. Like all that behavior, who you're backing, and you know, whether they're actually going to favor making better decisions for the economy or not, how that ripples through and what kind of effects it has. You know, so I think it really is important for people to take it seriously and consider like, hey, maybe we should be demanding more diversity when it comes to social media platforms, not allowing monopolies and not allowing buyouts. You know, and that's the problem with capitalism, is because they could make so much money that people won't reject it for reasons that I was talking about. You know, if somebody approached you and said, hey, are you going to sell this social media platform if I give you $6 billion? Less and less people are going to say no to that if capitalism is echoing through society. You know, number one thing that matters is money. And that's disastrous. Again, because that completely strips away any moral obligation we all have as people to make sure things don't turn out to be as crazy as they did in history. You know, if like everyone's supporting this idea of capitalism, then less and less action from people to make sure that things are on the right path as opposed to the opposite. You know, and I want to say that's exactly where the pandemic came from, because more and more people were taking shortcuts when it comes to the proper procedures to ensure, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be dumping waste into water. Maybe we shouldn't be dumping all this stuff, or, you know, making the process for, let's say, developing food where it's really not up to standard, not up to code. You know, instead of taking shortcuts, like, we'll actually invest money to make sure that it's proper and it meets the code and standard for food to be distributed in a way and like, or produced in a way that doesn't have disease spreading around, you know, or dumping oil in water because it's cheaper than having to go through the big process of making sure, you know, it's handled properly. Like, all that stuff, you know, sex trafficking, all these like Me Too movements, you know, people being silenced with money and all that stuff bottled up and exploded and turned into complete disaster. So rather than just being stuck in a cycle that gets worse and worse and worse and worse and less reversible, I think we need to like put a new system at the pedestal. You know, right now it's capitalism at the pedestal. Everybody's thinking of that as the system. Everybody's thinking that as a mode of operating. You know, what can I do to save money? It's like, no, that's not always the best. That's not the best approach. There's so many things that play into a functioning society, a functioning system, beyond just capital, and just how toxic and destructive and erosive it is on multiple levels. And where there is no change, you know, there is nothing that challenges that. It kind of breeds sociopathic behavior, because the more and more money people have, the less incentive they have to care, you know, because they've achieved the pinnacle of what the system is basically conditioning people to achieve or to attain or whatever else. You know, and that's a problem. But if there's something else that's at the forefront, you know, at the pinnacle, then gaining money isn't the be-all, end-all. That's just a step. And then a new responsibility starts to play in, you know, creating progressive environments, progressive jobs, you know, thinking about that sort of stuff. Like, and I'm going to say an ethos that inspires people to become better, you know, to invest and, let's say, improve education systems, improve social interaction, you know, rather than what it is now, this like really toxic fascist interaction of like, I'm better than you, or I'm superior or inferior, you know, that whole nonsense. how to figure out how to improve interaction so people could have great relationships, whether it's friendships or intimate relationships or family interactions, because a lot of it is heavily influenced by that now. When somebody who works in a really toxic environments where they're put down or whatever else, they go home and they take it out on people around them. It's almost in some cases it's not even conscious. People aren't even aware, hey, I'm so stressed out and irritated in work that I end up pouring that out on, let's say, my significant other or kids or whatever it is, so it becomes erosive in a lot of ways. And sometimes it's conscious. Sometimes people buy into that and they start seeing their family members and friends, significant others, in that light as well. It's the way they see or they're perceived at work, so less people are able to tune out that interaction because they spend so much time in those environments that it becomes like their second nature almost, right? That's something that happens in a lot of cases. The more often you spend time in, this, that, or that, whatever environment, it kind of rubs off on you. So, it's terrible. That's one of the biggest reasons why we have such awful interaction and sexism and racism and just this aggressive culture is because of that. And it's becoming more and more toxic because less and less people want to put up with that. So they're just like, hey, I'm not going to be subjected to that. And they start coming up with ways to counter that behavior, and it just snowballs. And then that person is just like, well, I'm not going to take that from that person. And it just gets worse and worse. It doesn't get better. It's not like people are going to be like, well, I guess, less and less people want to be at the receiving end of that sort of toxic interaction. So you could see how it just continues to spiral downwards. It doesn't improve at some point. And it's exacerbated by the internet. So if you think about it, even though that interaction has been present for a very long time, internet has really been around for, 30 years, 40 years. So within the 30, 40 years, it escalated even more and more. Back 30 years ago, the internet wasn't as big. 20 years ago, we didn't have the same social media and capabilities that we have now. So the more and more that reality becomes refined, and the more people start joining in on it, the more these interactions spread around, and that becomes worse and worse. So just examples of how that culture and how that way of thinking is incredibly erosive and gets more and more erosive. It doesn't become neutral at some point. It's not one of those things where, once everybody catches on, then things kind of equal out and things start to ride this very neutral, cohesive sort of wave. It's the opposite. It becomes worse. And a lot of people are like, well, you know, that is survival of the fittest. You know, that's the whole thing. And it's always just like such a stupid response to it. Like, I never accept that as an answer. It's an incredibly ignorant approach to civilization, to people. You know, that is something that applies to animals. Absolutely. You know, like, animals don't have the capabilities that we do. They can't create supermarkets. So for them, yes, they absolutely have to compete for food. They have to compete for shelter. They have to compete for social standards or whatever. And even that, you know, I challenge even that concept, because that all that is interpretation from us. You know, like this whole idea of like alpha, beta, and, you know, superior, those are terms and ideas that we've created. It's not like they passed us this knowledge and they said, look, you know, this is our social structure. This is fact. Like, this is how we are. So get with the program. It's we constructed that, and we decided that that's law. That is the rule, and that's how things are. You know, but animals are very caring towards each other. You know, the way that they interact with each other, they're really considerate towards each other. They have bonds and connections and interactions with each other that are more complex than I believe people see. You know, because again, we can't go into their minds and really understand those certain things. But we do understand that they're limited, and that's why they have to act vicious at times. They don't have the same language as we do. They can't have a democracy and be like, listen, let's sit down and talk about this. Like, don't try to come in and just murder everybody around, and, you know, or kill somebody or whatever else. Like, that's our capability. So for people to say survival, it's just like, shut up. Like, you're basing it off of something that's incredibly basic, but yet you accept all the complexities that come with our existence. You know, we're able to travel in space. We have cell phones. Those are all unnatural things. Those are things that are not possible coming from animals. You know, and yet we accept all that stuff as natural, or within our daily lives. So if the thing is survival of the fittest, then, you know, go live in a jungle, because anything that you're doing now is unnatural. You know, wearing clothes, that's not natural, that's man-made. And that's just the definition of natural. You know, something that isn't interfered by human intervention, that isn't created by humanity. That's something that's been present prior to our existence. You know, nature, natural. Instinctive. But there are a lot of things that are instinctive that we don't condone, and that we think that are incredibly, let's say, violent and repulsive, you know. So we have surpassed that in a lot of ways. You know, this whole idea of, well, animals do that, and, you know, this is their existence, and, you know, or the famous response from people who don't really think much is, but lions. You know, like, again, basing it on very limited creatures who are restricted to their own environments. You know, not all animals can live in all different types of climate. You know, they're limited to the climate that they're in, and that's pretty much it. Whereas we are capable of being in any sort of environment because of our intellect, because of our ability to logic and reason that allowed us to create things to survive in all sorts of conditions, whether it's in outer space. You don't see like storks in outer space, you know, or gazelles in, you know, underwater or whatever. They're very much limited to what they're capable of, and that's pretty much it. Whereas we are capable of all other stuff. So whenever people say things like that, survival of the fittest, this idea of superior, inferior, and all that other stuff, like all that is fascist nonsense. That's brainwashing jibber jabber to get more people to join their fascist cult. There's like so many factors that cancel out that concept. And it's archaic. It's something that people used to say back in the day, like colonialist periods and stuff, where they would judge and criticize people off of this kind of stuff. And they would do atrocious things. They would talk about sophistication. Meanwhile, they would go and like rape, murder, and kill children and people and all that other stuff simply because they feel like they're better than, whereas like, no, you just regressed to the most basic vile being, or the most basic animal, because that's exactly what basic animals would do. So on one hand, they're saying, oh, these people might not be civilized and they're so inferior. Meanwhile, they turn around and do like the most idiotic and basic thing possible. The most primitive form of behavior, becoming incredibly violent and psychotic. So it's this like insane contradiction coming from people who think themselves as like way too sophisticated, way too smart and intelligent and entitled to certain environments and lands and whatever else because of that. And it's absolutely nonsense. It's craziness. It's like it's the epitome of delusional grandeur. So yeah, just talking about all this stuff, talking about capitalism, talking about what sort of behaviors it calls out, what kind of reasoning it calls out. Just it's incredibly toxic. And I think a lot of times it's not said because it genuinely makes sense. It's said because, again, it pushes people to become incredibly divisive. You know, if I see myself as superior to X, Y, and Z, when there's political agenda against X, Y, and Z, well, then it's, you know, it's irrelevant to me. You know, it breeds this like really sociopathic sort of approach where because people see themselves as above others, then whatever action is taken against them becomes almost indifferent to them. You know, it's this entire culture that predicates on looking down at each other and just being like, well, that's not my problem. So it just kind of breeds that sort of attitude, which works well. You know, it doesn't interfere with crazy, genocidal, in some ways, behaviors, because everybody's so divided. You know, everybody's seeing each other as like less than. And that's also really dangerous. That brings so much apathy that when things really start to go south, people just don't know how to actually come together and work against that. And it's systematic. You know, it's something that really is it's cultivated in college, you know, where you have like fraternities and sororities and all that other stuff. Like that's their culture there, you know, alpha, beta, inferior, superior, like where people are gaslit and harassed to be put in their place as being seen as, you know, weak or whatever else, and then that person sees that themselves that way because of the system, and that becomes traumatic in a lot of ways. Like you hear people talking about their experiences and it's repulsive, like it's sociopathic, and people start like accepting that, well, that's just normal, that's how things are. And then that just gets escalated more and more, and people are just like, well, if I can get away with this, which is, again, that's where sociopathy like really grows. It has breeding ground. A lack of accountability because of this system that's in place, that's accepted as normal. It's a huge problem. Sexism breeds there as well. You know, that's a perfect spot for sexism, where people start to see the opposite sex as an inferior, as somebody who doesn't deserve quality treatment and behavior, and being perceived as a human being as opposed to a less than. You know, and you got these politicians now who are supporting this kind of outlook. They're like placing female politicians to come out and say this like sexist stuff. Like there was one that came out and said, oh yeah, female is a lesser sex, so they need this masculinity, quote unquote, basically chauvinism and disrespect towards females because of their weakness, quote unquote. And they're absolutely placed there. Why? Because they're getting paid a lot. So again, capitalism, right? Again, this idea of like, oh, if you pay me enough, then yeah, I'll totally, you know, prostitute myself out. Like, you could buy me and I'll say the worst things possible. I'll wreck a progress because that's going to make me more money, more capital. And then you got a bunch of people who are like, well, you know, this person's rich and they're a politician, so they know what they're talking about. And then they start acting or behaving in the way that that person condoned, you know, that allowed that to be out and perceived by people who actually look at them for information. So again, regressing people to most basic idiotic perception. Like, yeah, forget about diplomacy, forget about interaction, logic, and reason. We should act and think like basic animals, while pretending to be very high class and very intelligent and like totally contradicting everything, just not making any sense. And it's a I don't believe that that's actually what they think is just political agenda to get more and more people to back them and to act in this aggressive, nonsensical manner. And of course there are people who do believe it because they are brainwashed. You know, they're not challenged or aren't allowed to challenge that perception. You know, there's so much at stake for them that they don't think about that stuff. They just do. You know, like trust fund kids and kids who are promised financial independence and wealth and all that other stuff. Like, they'll do whatever. So it's like a mixed bag of ignorant behavior. It's like people who have an agenda and they're doing it, people who don't have an agenda and they're doing it, people who are brainwashed and they're thinking and doing that. So and it still amazes me that people buy that stuff as genuine message, genuine belief, like, oh yeah, this person's really telling us the truth. Like, politicians will never ever reveal the truth because that compromises their benefits. That compromises their position, that compromises agendas. So to think that anything that comes out of their mouth is actually honest, you know, that isn't evidential, that isn't, you know, like, you have some politicians who are basing it off of evidence that's present. That makes sense. But those who are just speaking in these like generalities and making these ridiculous statements, they're brainwashing. That's not politics. Those are the kind of people that if you caught red-handed in the act of doing whatever, they'll still deny it. They'll still say, nope, that's not me. It's a psychosis. It's a mental disorder. It's something that that I call brat syndrome, where, like, no matter what, they don't want to ever be held accountable for anything. And that's something that develops as a kid. You know, if you've never been held accountable, if you always figured out how to avoid accountability, it becomes your default way of behavior. You will deny it, and you revel in that. Like, you get off on the fact that you're able to get away with it regardless, whether you're caught red-handed or not, or whatever else. Like, it's something that they get a kick out of, just like kids. You know, when kids do that and they start laughing about it because they're able to like get away from that. You know, it's, oh, I just escaped my parents holding me accountable for something. And if that's never fixed, they just get worse and worse. Their actions get worse and worse. But their reactions to it stay the same. They still revel in it. And of course, they consider themselves to be incredibly clever and genius because they're able to do it. So it develops this like sociopathic behavior, you know, and this egomania. And that's what you're seeing a lot in politics right now. Well, not now. It's been going on. It's just now it's on the shoulders of a new generation. You know, there's movies now that now they're like movies that I've been watching that are from the 70s, and I mention this often, from the 70s and 80s, and they talk about the same exact problems. You know, corporations just like refusing to increase wages, you know, exploiting people, exploiting the environment, people protesting for better living conditions, like all that stuff, education systems, like all of it, same issues, just different number. There's a lot of things covered today, you know. Started the week running. But unfortunately, I do have to end the stream. It is past the time. It was a blast talking about all this stuff, talking about all these different topics. I will be back tomorrow for the same stuff. 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, figure drawing basics. 9 p.m. it's gonna be coloring. No, the project stream actually. Coloring comics is on Wednesdays, so you guys can check back in then. If you guys do enjoy the content, remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They both are greatly appreciated, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you.